Joining us now to talk about the midterms from a different perspective, Adam Sharp with Twitter. Thanks for coming in, Adam.
Hey, Brett. Thanks for having me.
The midterms, obviously, you're looking at issues that people are focused on Twitter. First of all, the evolution of Twitter. When we talked back in 2012, it was different from years before. Now, it's evolved even further, the number of tweets.
Mm-hmm. When we spoke in the weeks leading up to the 2012 elections, you had about 400 million or so tweets a day worldwide on Twitter. Today, we're seeing over 1 billion tweets every two days.
1 billion
1 billion every 2 days. Now, to put that in context, when President Obama first took office after the 2008 election, we had 1 billion tweets in the entire time since Twitter started 2.5 years earlier. So now, what had been 2.5 years of conversation at the beginning of this presidency is today less than every 2 days.
When it comes to the midterms, you have, what, roughly about 1 million tweets a day about the midterm elections?
About 1 million tweets a day in the U.S. about politics right now.
How do you break it out issue-wise? Like, what is striking?
So we've been tracking about 15 to 20 different common issues people are talking about across the spectrum. One thing that jumps out, in nearly every single state, President Obama is the driving topic people are talking about. If they're talking about this election, talking about politics, they're sharing their opinion, one way or the other, on the president. That is a very strong influence on the dialogue. When we look further down the list, though, there are a few states that pop on very specific issues. New Yorkers talk about Ebola more than people in other states because of the case diagnosed there in the last few weeks. Earlier in the month, it had been Texas driving that conversation. We saw an increase in conversation around guns in Washington after the Marysville shooting last week. We're seeing conversation popping about taxes in Illinois, for example, or on law enforcement practices in Missouri, still several months now after Ferguson.
Abortion, a couple of different states dealing with that, one of them in the heat of this Senate battle.
In fact, in Colorado, where abortion has been a major issue in Senator Udall's re-election race, Coloradans talk about abortion more than voters in any other state on Twitter.
Wow. When it goes to gender split, how does that come down?
So the overall political conversation is skewing more male right now. About 60% of the tweets about politics, our algorithms sense, are from men, about 40% coming from women. Starting from that baseline, though, some issues tend to skew more one way or another. For the men, the issues that tend to skew the most male are terrorism, conversation about ISIS in particular, taxes, and conversations about privacy or cybersecurity issues more broadly. For women, the issue that skews most in that direction, gay rights, with marriage equality being on the ballot or at least part of the discussion in many states. Abortion, again, we talked about a moment ago, and education.
You can see that people engaged in this political discussion on Twitter are probably, could be characterized as likely voters.
Well, I mean, it's hard to say. No one is coming out and proclaiming, I'm going to vote or I'm not going to vote. But checking for a likely voter has always been one of the tough challenges in polling as well. And I'd argue that someone who is joining that public debate, someone who is coming out and saying, I want to be a part of this community and talk about these issues and discover Twitter as an excellent place to have that real-time public conversation, these are probably the same people who next Tuesday want to continue that conversation and have their voice heard at the ballot box.
Yeah. On Tuesday, do you expect that volume to increase exponentially?
We certainly saw that pattern in 2012, where there was a significant increase in activity on Election Day, starting in the morning as people were talking about issues on their way to the polls. You remember we spoke on Election Night 2012, and we're looking at the issues people were talking about as they went to go vote. But the real peak tends to come after the sun goes down and people are talking about the returns, who won, who lost, and what that means for their communities moving forward.
If there's one thing you would say that President Obama and that issue of his presidency and how it factors into this election really stands out.
It does stand out, especially for the second midterm of a presidency. The lame duck vote, you often see more as a referendum on Congress than on the presidency. That dynamic is a little bit different this year. We've seen that in the polling, and it's being reflected in the Twitter numbers. Twitter is a powerful, real-time public conversation. So it's not a closed circle of people talking about this, but really a vast town square of conversation as we head into Election Day.
And Twitter politics is what?
At Gov.
At Gov.
Or election.twitter.com. You can look at these numbers yourself.
Okay. And at Brett Baer. Don't forget that one either. Adam, thank you.
Thank you, Brett.